Hello, my name is Dr. Laura, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I co-own a group practice, and my passion is working with people who have experienced abuse and neglect in childhood and have developed trauma disorders as adults, whether that's complex PTSD or dissociative disorders. I have been doing this for a good 20 years now, and I have learned so much, both from other professionals, but also from each and every one of my clients. And as I am nearing the middle of my career, I am thinking that I would really love to share some thoughts with all of you about some of the things I've learned and some of my observations. And I'm also open to hearing your thoughts and observations, whether you are also a clinician working with clients, or whether this is personal, whether this applies to your life or people you know, or maybe even both. So, yeah, enjoy and let me know what you think. Welcome to the Impact of Abuse and Neglect in Narcissistic Family Systems, Part 2. In this section, I'm going to talk with you guys about the topics of shame and humiliation. For shame, we're going to talk about the difference between healthy shame and catastrophic shame. And then we're also going to talk about humiliation. And these are important things to talk about because with narcissistic abuse and neglect, attempts to avoid shame and humiliation and attempts to pass them on to other people are really central to what happens in a family where there's narcissistic abuse. So what is shame? Because shame is critical to everything narcissistic related. So to talk about shame, we have to talk about healthy shame and unhealthy shame. Healthy shame is a temporary emotion you have when you violate a social norm. And that shame dissipates as you reconnect with family members. So I have a great quote for what that looks like for kiddos. So I'd like to share a quote about healthy shame and how shame is intended to be and intended to work from Patricia DeYoung's book. It's a really, really excellent book on chronic shame, understanding and treating chronic shame. It's more written for therapists than just whoever else, ordinary people without the psychology background because of some of her language, but I still think this is a good quote. So this is what is supposed to happen. When a child misbehaves, a parent's displeasure may bring on momentary shame, temporary shame, and the danger of the child shattering or falling apart. The context here is that she talks a lot in detail about the shame experience and how an acute shame, like that moment you feel like an attack, a wave of shame, there's a sense of internal shattering and disintegration. So she's saying developmentally, a child will experience that briefly, but in a good enough parenting scenario, the disciplinary point of the child's self-experience returns to coherence. Disciplinary point meaning like the child has words for what happened. And the words are something like, I did a bad thing, but it's over and I'm still a good kid. So that kind of small break, distress, but then repair with the parent helps a child learn a sense of this is what goodness feels like. This is what it feels like when I'm bad. Internal badness feels like. And this allows you to also, go into later childhood and adulthood, being able to have those concepts, rather than having catastrophic or toxic shame or catastrophic extreme shame, like I'm going to talk about next. So that sets you up, those early experiences of making a mistake and feeling shame and then reconnecting with your parent are the foundation for knowing how to manage shame well. Narcissistic and abuse do not produce healthy shame. And instead, they produce what I'm going to call extreme or catastrophic shame. And in these shame experiences, the person is flooded by feelings of shame and inferiority. They feel isolated from other people, but you also want to avoid people because you expect contempt from the people around you. In a moment of catastrophic shame, Like you don't even have any words, and there's a sense of kind of disintegrating and falling apart inside when you have acute shame. And, because it's catastrophic shame, there's not repair. So it's just stuck inside of you. This is a great quote on extreme or catastrophic shame from a research article by Judith Herman. If you don't know Judy Herman, whether you're a therapist or not a therapist, her book, Trauma and Recovery, is basically the entire reason that we commonly diagnose PTSD as resulting from child abuse and not simply from war. It was a very influential book in the early 90s. But in any case, this is a quote on that. Extreme or catastrophic experiences of shame are a signal of profound relational disruptions or violations. When methods of coercive control are used, which narcissistic abuse and neglect is a way of exerting coercive control, when they're used within the primary attachment relationship, meaning the relationship between a child and their parents, we'll talk more about attachment later, the developing child is overwhelmed with extreme shame states, intolerably so. So humiliation is when you experience shame, but you're experiencing it in front of somebody who has contempt for you and disgust for you, and who is potentially actively abusing you at that time. So humiliation is being seen when you're in a state of toxic shame, catastrophic shame, because with catastrophic shame, you want to disappear. You don't want anyone to see you. Whereas with humiliation, somebody sees you, and if they are humiliating you, they're actively wanting you to feel this way. They're trying to set up a hierarchy where they're worth more than you are. So these experiences, of course, are worse if there are multiple people humiliating you, or even multiple people watching while someone humiliates you. Judy Herman also has a great quote about humiliation. She says, in cases of trauma in which a relationship of domination and subordination is established, which it is in narcissistic abuse when it's in the parent to child relationship, feelings of humiliation, degradation, and shame are central to the victim's experience. And the resultant post-traumatic condition, the resulting PTSD disorder, can be seen as an anxiety disorder, but also a shame disorder, which I think is really powerful. We tend to think of PTSD as happening because things are very frightening, but you can also develop PTSD when you are regularly overwhelmed with shame that you cannot regulate or manage or escape from in a healthy way. And which happens anytime that a child has shame experiences the parent is deliberately causing and does not help the child repair from. So chronic shame is basically an ongoing condition. So repeated experiences of extreme or catastrophic shame and of humiliation lead to chronic shame. Chronic shame is not just a temporary emotional experience. Like we've been talking about shame and humiliation as like the acute moment of being humiliated or being shamed. But chronic shame is not about that. People with chronic shame genuinely believe that they're less worthy than everyone else. Some people I've talked to talk about feeling disgusting, feeling evil, demonic, or even like subhuman, like the rest of humanity is here and I am here. I think of a client I talked to who is actually a very kind person that no one would describe as an evil person. And she talks about her shame as being so bad, like she feels like she's like a serial killer who is in prison. And that is all due to narcissistic abuse and neglect. So people with this chronic shame expect to be treated by contempt by other people. At least when people find out who I really am, I have had a number of clients whose parents actually tell them the only reason people are treating you well is because they don't know who you really are. And once they know, they'll basically treat you with contempt also. And that's just a terrible, terrible thing to tell a child, because you're basically not only teaching the child yourself that they're worthless, but you're teaching them that anyone who is kind to you is basically doesn't know you. Because if they did know you, they would treat the same way the parent treats you, which is horrific. First time I heard that, it struck with me for like an entire week. I was like, how can anyone do that to their child? But, unfortunately, in certain kinds of family systems, that is routine and that is more common than one would like to think. Thank you for watching part 2 of my presentation on narcissistic family systems. In part 3, I'm going to talk about how those experiences of abuse and neglect turn into PTSD, and how the child's ability to attach in an environment that can produce PTSD is extremely important.